back, WNST. Comes out of our eyes and our skulls after being up till 2 o'clock in the morning watching baseball late night on Sunday. But I tell you what, there was football all day Sunday, and I began at 9:30 in the morning because, well, I'm a glutton for punishment, and I love Twickenham Stadium because I've never been there. Luke Jones has been to Wembley. We spent one gruesome afternoon over in London, and then we watched football all day and all night, and long after the Steelers dispatched of the Detroit Lions, who are a paper lion, if you will. We were watching baseball late into the night. Dude, it was a nice Sunday to have the day off. I don't advocate these Thursday night games, but when we win them 40-0, and when we can sit around all weekend and watch a pretty good football game on Saturday with Ohio State and Penn State, and then get good baseball. You know, I don't want to say I haven't missed the Ravens at all, Luke, but I am looking forward to getting down to Piranhas in Nashville, bending the elbow on Friday and Saturday this weekend in the Music City, and seeing if the Ravens can play a little bit more like they did on Thursday night. And I know with the Joe Flacco situation and everything that's happening around here, it's going to be kind of a crazy week out in Owings Mills to see whether he's healthy and where he is in protocol. But the last time we saw Joe Flacco was quite ugly, man.
Yeah, it was. And you have to hope that the extra few days that the Ravens get, and as you alluded to, when you win on a Thursday night, you really like it because the back end of that, you get essentially a mini bye. And keep in mind, they have their bye coming up next week. We'll be talking about that at this time.
Even though this felt like a bye, didn't it, right? Sitting around watching football on Sunday is weird.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But, you know, the good news is with the Ravens dealing with the injuries that they've dealt with, and keep in mind, they had a pretty lengthy injury list going into Thursday night's game. And I'm not even talking about guys that are already lost for the season, which we know that's well documented. But you hope, because Flacco doesn't have this long, lengthy history of concussions or anything like that, you're hoping he can get through the protocol and be able to play on Sunday. But it may not happen because I think it's really difficult to predict this kind of stuff for any player who gets through the protocol and is able to return the following week. You have some guys who sometimes miss 2 or 3 games, depending on the severity. So, but that said, with the Ravens having their win in hand and sitting back and enjoying the rest of the football weekend, it's kind of interesting to see how it all played out. I mean, if you look at the entire body of the weekend as far as unexpected results, the Ravens beating the Dolphins 40-0 probably is as surprising as anything because there are quite a few people who were picking Miami to win in that game. But this is one of those rare weekends that I kind of look at the results and can't say I was overly shocked by anything I saw. Maybe Dallas handling the Redskins the way they did, but at the same time, I think they've won in Landover every year since 2012, so maybe that's not all that surprising. But overall, some entertaining games, but not necessarily the crazy, shocking outcomes that we've been seeing on a weekly basis in the NFL so far this year.
Well, a couple things. Cincinnati won again, and Oakland lost again, and Buffalo won again, and, Houston lost out in Seattle with, their upstart quarterback who looks amazing. Pittsburgh managed to win again. Part of this for me is going through the AFC and saying, all right, so the Ravens are an 8-8 team. All right, fine, or whatever they're going to be. Maybe they're a 6-10 team, but maybe they're a 9-7 team. And if they're a 9-7 team, is that going to get them into the 6th spot so they can go to wherever, New England and get killed, Kansas City, wherever it's going to be, or at least have that opportunity to maybe be upright, maybe be running the ball better by then, maybe be a tad healthier then. I don't know, but I know this: whatever a team is in September, it's not going to be in December. And I tell you, they're printing up tickets in Philadelphia. They got their nonstop flights into Minnesota. They're ready for the Super Bowl. They're 7-1 at the turn. I'll hear all of that, but for me, if I'm John Harbaugh, if I'm Joe Flacco, if I'm a part of the Ravens right now, I look at it and say, yeah, we're 4-4. We've stunk some. We've won a few games. We're in there. But what's the rest of the season look like? And the rest of the season doesn't look any more prosperous in the Oaklands or the Buffaloes or the Jets or the Miamis or the Cincinnatis or the Houstons or the Jacksonvilles or the anyones that are also sort of on pace to win 8 or 9 games. And, I don't think any of these teams think they're going to win 10 right now, right? None of them. I mean, none of them have looked good enough to win 10 games. But somewhere in there, somebody's going to win 9 or 10, and they're going to make the playoffs. You just need to make sure you're part of that argument. And for the Ravens, that really is about going down to Tennessee and taking care of business against a team that is at least vulnerable, at least susceptible. They're nothing special. They're certainly not special without their quarterback. So this is an opportunity this week to go try to run the ball, try to play defense, try to take the ball away, and try to steal a road victory.
Yeah, I mean, at some point they're going to have to win a couple road games. And to their credit, they've played some good football on the road. I mean, look what they did in Cincinnati week 1. Look what they did in Oakland, where they, even with it being the backup quarterback E.J. Manuel, they still really took it to the Raiders, who at this point don't look very good. I wouldn't write them off completely, but it's getting close to that point.
Hey, you don't like 4-4. How would you like 3-5, right?
Exactly. I mean, you just get to a point and you start saying, well, it doesn't look very good. But to your point, a month ago, what were we talking about in the AFC? We were talking about that West Division. I mean, at that point, Kansas City was undefeated. Denver was looking really good. The Raiders, we thought they were going to be a powerhouse this year after what they were able to do last year. And the Chargers, even though their record wasn't good, you've seen how they've competed. I mean, that's a team that 3-5, and I think their point differential is -2. So it kind of just shows how competitive they've been.
Yeah, I don't want to play them. I mean, Homer Road, they play 16 road games. I mean, I don't want to see the LA Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, they gave New England everything they could handle on Sunday. But at the same time, that division, which was looking like a complete juggernaut a month ago, now you look at it and say, okay, Kansas City still looks really good, but they've lost 2 in a row, so they're not looking invincible. Denver can't score. The Chargers are 3-5. Oakland's 3-5. I mean, now you're kind of looking at, a month ago we were saying maybe both wild cards come from the AFC West. Now you wouldn't really predict that. Maybe Denver figures it out offensively, but at the same time, you kind of look around the rest of the league. I mean, Buffalo, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm expecting the Bills to make a deep playoff run or anything like that, but you got to give them some credit. They played really well. That defense has been really, really good. It seems like the new regime in there has gotten Rex Ryan's former players. First of all, he's jettisoned some of those guys that weren't necessarily the most dedicated or the most productive, and they're getting really good play out of the guys that they have. So, Buffalo looks like at least in terms of the wild card, they're looking like a threat. I mean, Jacksonville, we've talked about how good their defense has been. I mean, these aren't teams that you expected to be any good whatsoever, but it's hard to argue with their results to this point. I mean, Houston, they go to Seattle in a game that you, on paper, expect to be a defensive struggle, and Deshaun Watson gets into a shootout with Russell Wilson. I mean, it was a wildly entertaining game. So, you have Houston. So, as much as the Ravens can look at all their issues, they can look around and see some of these other teams who I think are going to have something to say about making a wild card run, but it's still sitting there for the Ravens to make a run. They have to find more consistency. As much as mediocrity's kind of been the theme for the Baltimore Ravens in this post-Super Bowl 47 era, I'd say it's been more volatility this year. They've looked really good at times, and they've looked horrible at times. They haven't really played that many close games. I mean, I think, 6 of their 8 games this year have been decided by more than one possession, and one of those 2 ended up being a single-possession game because they threw a garbage touchdown pass in Minnesota on the very last play of the game. That was really a 2-score game for that entire second half, really. So, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, we've talked about the schedule. I think this game at Tennessee is certainly one of those games that could swing the Ravens from being a non-playoff team to a team that has a really good chance to win one of those wild card spots if they play good football in the second half of the season. At some point, you're going to have to steal a couple more road wins. You can't just rely on doing what playing at home because they've lost 2 home games already this year. So this is one that you think about the implications of it with it being an AFC team. Right now, Tennessee is tied for first place in their division, but you beat them, they fall into that wild card race, and then you have a tiebreaker over them. So these conference games are all the more critical. We know it. The Ravens, even over their most successful years with John Harbaugh, for the most part, have been a wild card team. So how important those conference games are. So when you have a chance to go to Tennessee and beat a Titans team that very much is in the thick of the playoff race. You got to take care of business. But, again, easier said than done when you don't know what the status of Joe Flacco is going to be at this point.
Well, that's, assuming Joe Flacco gets upright at some point between now and, let's say, Green Bay on the 19th, given the bye week, and if they survive these two games, meaning they're 5-5, when Houston's coming in here at Thanksgiving. If that's the case, if they can split one of these two games, the weird part is the end of the schedule, and it's been a little while for me to examine this, but Cleveland on the road, Christmas week, Indianapolis at home, Christmas weekend, Cincinnati at home, New Year's. The last three games of the season, they will be favored as long as Joe Flacco's upright, I would think, right? I mean, as long as there's some semblance of what they are, they'll be favored in the last three games. That's a nice little thing that I don't think they've ever had, and certainly the at Pittsburgh game on December 10th looms large. And the Texans coming in here is not going to be an easy game either. But I would take the Ravens' schedule right now, the last 8-9 weeks, when you consider Tennessee, bye, Green Bay without Aaron Rodgers, then some home cooking and road cooking in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati that they've never had it set up so well for the final 8 weeks of the season. Now, that being said, they have, 20 injuries. They have a quarterback got hit in the head. They got a lot of stuff going on. But if you're just looking at the opponents, there's nothing daunting about the rest of this schedule, especially with Green Bay without Aaron Rodgers, which makes it feel a lot more winnable.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this for a while. I mean, now, it's hard to do that when you look at some of the games that they've had recently, even that were very winnable. I mean, the Chicago Bears had a rookie quarterback making his first road start, and you saw how that turned out. But you're right, on paper, you look at the schedule the rest of the way, and other than going to Pittsburgh, and the Ravens have certainly been more than respectable as an adversary at Heinz Field over the years, even recently, even with them being a little more lackluster the last few years. They've still gone to Heinz Field and given the Steelers everything they can handle. But beyond that game, yeah, I mean, you do kind of look at this and say, well, I don't think they're going to run the table, but I also don't think it's out of the question that they couldn't reel off 4 wins in a row at some point, or 4 of 5, 5 of 6, something like that. I mean, just based on the quality of opponent, it doesn't look out of the question. Now, that said, I think you also have to be realistic looking at this football team and say, well, they haven't shown near the level of consistency to make you think that they can reel off 4 in a row or to win 5 of 6. But, just how it looks on paper, and we know how quickly this can change. Earlier, a month ago, we were assuming Andrew Luck was going to be playing for Indianapolis come week 16, and now it's looking more and more like he might not play this year with his shoulder surgery, recovery, hitting a couple snags here recently. So you never really know. But it is very reasonable to look at the schedule and say, any of those games, other than maybe Pittsburgh on the road, which you just know how tough that is, and I think at this point, looking at how the Steelers have played compared to the Ravens, not that you concede anything, but you say that one's going to be tough to win. Other than that, any of these other games in isolation, you say the Ravens have a very reasonable chance and should be favored in a lot of those games. So they have to go out and do it, and they have to find that level of consistency. And what they were able to do defensively against Miami, you really like seeing that. And certainly with the running game, with Alex Collins getting going, finally unleashing him, he's been their best playmaker on offense, which is both an indictment on the rest of the offense and a compliment to him because he's been terrific. Was good to see that, and I think it's very cut and dried. If this team's going to get to where it wants to go, they need more defensive performances like what they did on Thursday. Not saying a shutout, but needing their defense to lead the way. And let's face it, for some large stretches so far this season, the defense hasn't played at that level. But they need that, and they're going to need their running game to be very, very productive because even with Joe Flacco, even with Jeremy Maclin on the field, even with Mike Wallace on the field, it's not as though this passing game's been firing on all cylinders really at all, other than game and a half, 2 games out of the first 8 games they've played this season.
He is Luke Jones. You can follow his work at Baltimore Luke on Twitter. And, of course, it comes to you every single morning in the WNST morning newspaper. All of that brought to you by Planet Fitness. Want to give a shout-out to our friends at Deli-ish on Wise Avenue in Dundalk. New York-style deli food now coming to my homeland. They got Reubens. They got corned beef. They got legit sandwiches like the Curly Fryer. When are they going to put the Dundalk Owl or the Patapsco Patriot on that menu over there at Deli-ish? Stop by, say hello. Tasty Pickles, they cater in, and you can always find them at delibaltimore.com. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You'll hear Carl Delmont this week talking about the Harrisburg Heat here on WNST.net. And if you're looking to buy or sell a home, don't make that mistake. Get the Friedmont education online at FriedmontMortgage.com and Friedmont.com out online. Luke, the rest of the slate on Sunday, as much as it's a very, very rare weekend, right, that I sit around and get a chance to watch all these games, the teams that were in peril sort of came to the rescue in the end. I mean, Cleveland had Minnesota in trouble for 5 minutes early in the game. Cincinnati certainly struggled with Jacoby Brissett and whatnot. But, even the good teams and the teams that are winning, it feels like there's so many players missing. And when you watch the Ravens, our fans who stay away now because of the knee or because of the price or because of the hour of the night, whatever the excuse is for the empty seats, part of the excuse is, well, it's not exciting football. I don't know. I watched football all day on Sunday. I don't want to say it was exciting or not exciting. Probably depends on whether you were watching Seattle and Houston play or whether you were watching Buffalo and Oakland. But, I didn't feel like the play was bad, but I felt like there aren't special things happening so much as lucky things. I mean, there's some highlights here and again, but we don't have a 99 Rams running around out there. We don't have a 2001 Ravens defense running around out there. And all of this mediocrity, maybe it doesn't make the most beautiful games, but I tell you what, you put the TV on about 3:15 on a Sunday afternoon, in general, you don't know who's going to win a lot of these games because they're all 10, 14 points, a score here, a block kick there, a special teams, a fumble, an interception. They're always a minute away from turning around and having something wild happen. So as far as a guy sitting and watching the red zone on a Sunday, I didn't find it to be like boring. I found it to be kind of nice and kind of comforting to sit around and watch football on a Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was a bad slate of games this weekend. I mean, I think there have been some weekends that weren't as good. One thing that I did notice watching Red Zone over the course of Sunday afternoon, a lot of teams with kicker issues. I mean, I know that, and I know that there was some really bad weather along the East Coast with bad storms and rain and wind and all of that. But at one point, I kind of asked myself, are these kickers, are they kicking with their eyes closed? I mean, I guess maybe just a tip of the cap to Justin Tucker when you see some of these issues elsewhere.
By the way, him getting the kick blocked is probably going to put his head down this week. He didn't like that at all. I didn't, the body, every part of that. I bet he won't have a kick block for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would hope not. And isn't as much about him as it is the rest of the unit. I mean, there's a certain amount of responsibility assessed with the kicker compared to the blocking for the kicker. Does the kick come out low? Do you allow someone to get into the backfield and make the block? So, but that said, it was a pretty competitive weekend. For the most part, home teams took care of business. But I think give Carolina credit, a nice road win against Tampa Bay, and the Bucs were a team that I think a lot of us kind of thought they'd be a team to break out, and Jameis Winston specifically, and that hasn't really happened. I mean, they're 2-5. They've lost 4 in a row, so that's a team that I think a lot of people were picking as maybe even the favorite to win that division. But certainly Carolina takes care of business, even if it wasn't the prettiest game. Atlanta had their hands full completely with the Jets. I mean, we've talked so much about the Ravens' offense struggling, but here's Atlanta, which was a historic offense last year, and they've really had their issues to the point where there's been talk about them replacing their new offensive coordinator. So they got to win, but you kind of go down the list. It was workmanlike efforts for some of these teams. I mean, New Orleans, who don't look now. The Saints are playing some pretty darn good football. They've won 5 in a row. They have a defense that's much improved, yet they still have that high-powered offense with Drew Brees. We mentioned New England. You kind of just go down the list. There weren't a ton of surprises, but as you pointed out, you get to be about 3:30 in the afternoon if it's a 1 o'clock kickoff. and most of these games are still in doubt to one degree or another. So I think maybe beyond Seattle, Houston, which I think the Texans going to Seattle and playing the way they did with Deshaun Watson under center, that was impressive even with the defeat. I think you got to give some credit to the Buffalo Bills. I mean, that was an Oakland team that, let's face it, was coming off of extra rest and needed a road win, and Buffalo handled them, and handled them pretty convincingly. Bills team that hasn't been to the playoffs since, 1999, I guess it is. And they're looking pretty good so far. So, other than that, I mean, I think the big winner of the weekend, to me, had to be the Ravens, just as far as taking care of business. Not a big winner in the sense of losing Joe Flacco, but they handled a team that, on paper looked like it was going to be a difficult opponent, and they beat the pants off of them. But overall, can't say I was overly shocked at anything I saw over the weekend. Even had a fairly entertaining London game with the Browns actually competing and giving Minnesota a tough game before the Vikings ultimately prevailed late.
Last thing for you, the Philadelphia Eagles, they're going to host the Denver Broncos coming up this week. They are the flavor of the month, literally, in the NFL at this point in Carson Wentz. And I had to send my boy Jimmy Schwartz a note off. I chatted with his old pal Dave McGinnis, who's now calling the Titans games. And I think we all are standing a little bit on the outside and marvel of the Carson Wentz thing. I know the Browns fans don't like it very much.
Yeah, they're definitely probably the Browns front office, because it might end up costing them their job, seeing what Carson Wentz has done. But it'll be interesting. And certainly they took care of business against San Francisco. But keep in mind, they lost Jason Peters in that Monday night game. They're a franchise left tackle, a terrific player. And they lost Jordan Hicks, their inside linebacker. And, I think we know here firsthand in Baltimore how important a middle linebacker can be to a defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond moving forward without those players. They certainly seem to do okay against the 49ers, who fell to 0-8. But it's hard not to watch them and not like that football team. I mean, Carson Wentz wasn't brilliant on Sunday by any means, but you've just seen the entire body of work, and you can't help but be impressed with that guy. But to the Eagles' credit, look at what they've done. Look at what they did in the offseason. They brought in Alshon Jeffrey. They brought in Torrey Smith. They brought in LeGarrette Blount. I mean, they built around this guy, and you've seen what's happened as a result. I mean, he's been able to take off and fly, no pun intended, being a Philadelphia Eagle. But they're looking good. And as much as I'm not ready to just automatically pencil them into the Super Bowl at 7-1, I mean, it's sitting right there for them to make the kind of run that they need to make to get a first-round bye and maybe have home field advantage. So it's tough not to like that team, but will be interesting. They've suffered some really huge injuries over the last couple of weeks. Interesting to see how they hold up in that regard, but certainly didn't seem to feel too many effects against the 49ers on Sunday, which isn't exactly a shock.
Baltimore, Luke finds him, and Luke at WNST. He's going to be on the backfields in Owings Mills all week as the Ravens get a little extra time here to prepare for the Nashville trip and the Tennessee Titans. We're going to be partying at Piranhas in Nashville all weekend. We'll be mentioning that out on social media. My wife and I will be there Friday night, then again Saturday afternoon, stopping by, meeting, greeting, drinking, eating, and, we're hoping the Ravens will be representative down there in Nashville. We've had some great Sunday afternoons and some Saturday afternoons as well, especially in January in my lifetime down there in Nashville. So good fun. You can find everything we do out at WNST.net. We're also doing all of our radio out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. That is there for you 24 hours a day to listen anytime, anywhere. Download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. They're all percolating 24 hours a day. It's kind of how we roll around here. And last but never ever least, if you're looking for breaking news, that's going to happen first on your WNST text service. We've got you covered. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday getting you ready for a weekend in Nashville, Tennessee, where I will attempt to avoid country music for 2.5 days while drinking beer and watching college football at Piranhas in Nashville. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are WNST.net AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.